you all so much for coming to Galloway Conversations. I'm absolutely thrilled that Andy and Angela are here with us this evening, and they're going to take us on a wonderful mystery and stories, and we all know how beautiful our landscape is. So I'm not going to say any more. I'm going to hand them over to you and you to them, and do enjoy the evening, and I'll talk again at the end of the night. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for joining us on this adventure from the north to the south of the Glenkens. We did try and get Balmaclellan in, but we just couldn't get that to work, but we are going from Carsphairn all the way down to Mossdale. My name's Andy from Stravaiging with Andy.
And I'm Angela from the YouTube channel Galloway Retold. Okay, so Carsphairn is a place full of quirky and interesting history, but I want to start with its slightly macabre origin story because that actually connects the beginning and the end of this walk. So without further ado, here is a wee video all about it.
The village of Carsphairn sits high in the Galloway hills on a floodplain of the River Deuch. The name is Gaelic, meaning the carse of the alders, with a carse being a home or low-lying piece of land by a river. The village takes its name from the parish, as the parish is the much older of the two. Now, before the parish of Carsphairn was constituted, the land the village and its surrounds sits on was split between the parishes of Kells and Dalry. The reason that Carsphairn became a parish of its own? Well, it was more than 12 miles to either Dalry or Kells kirkyards, thus a long way to send a body in a coffin by cart, let alone for a funeral procession to walk. Considering that it is possibly the hilliest parish in the Stewartry, you can imagine just how arduous that might actually be. What that meant, though, was that many of the dead from up here high in the Galloway hills were being buried in the nearby fields instead. Now, according to Alexander Trotter's East Galloway sketches, on the hill above the abandoned village of Polmaddy at the southern end of what is now Carsphairn parish, there are some 70 or more cairns which mark the main graveyard people used before the parish was constituted. Others are dotted around the landscape too, including near the top of Dundue Hill. In 1645, a complaint was made about the fact that these burials were taking place, and the parish of Carsphairn was constituted shortly after. The constitution of the parish led to the building of the kirk, and of course the kirkyard, and an end to the indignity of field burials in Carsphairn parish. If you're ever driving by Carsphairn, it's worth dropping into the Heritage Centre here to learn more about this fascinating wee village.
So the first walk we're doing today is going from Carsphairn down to Polmaddy, known as the Old Pack Road. This is a core path. We start by missing a slide. So basically we start, it's a 5 to 10 minutes from Carsphairn, going down the road from out leaving Carsphairn and basically down to the Liggett, which is where means the small wooden gate or fence. From there, we then go around the back to the War Memorial, and at the War Memorial, which actually has a plaque for a VC winner, William Kennedy, who actually served with the Canadians, but his family was from Knockgray. From there, we make our way back down to the road and along the verge briefly until we come to the bridge, where there's a footpath on either side of the road. The Liggett Bridge crosses the Water of Deuch, which is on its way down to Kendon Loch. We come to our first challenge after that, where the gate up to Carnaval is padlocked. It has been reported to the council. You can step over the fence reasonably easily and then onto the track. So we then follow the track up to the farm at Carnaval Farm, through a couple of gates, when there's notice boards around giving more information about the walk and what's going on there. And we go across through a couple of gates, along a boardwalk, and then through the final gate we come up to Carnaval.
This prehistoric cairn would have been more than 80 feet long and 30 feet wide at its peak, but much of the stone has been reused in local building. It would have been a burial cairn, although it hasn't been investigated archaeologically, so we can't say for sure whether either what kind of burial cairn it is or who might have been buried there. It's still an impressive site on the hillside and has some really great views across the glen.
Once we can see the cairn, we're actually going left, we're not going up to the cairn, we're making our way up to this small gate up on the hill. It looks very lonely up there, and as we make our way up, we need to make sure we look around the whole area, because the views of the Rins, the northern end of the Rins, are just stunning up here. And if you actually look towards the base of the Rins up around here, we actually start to see signs of, we can just make out Woodhead from there.
It's a wee walk worth it on its own to get to Woodhead from Carsphairn, because what's left of the mines and the village is really quite haunting, as you can see. Lead was discovered in the hills there in 1838, and the mine, with an on-site smelting plant and village, which included a school and a library, were built by Colonel Macadam Cathcart. By the 1840s, the school had 46 pupils and Woodhead was a bustling community. The mine was turning out 900 tonnes of lead per year. The population, but within 10 years, the amount of lead being mined had dropped drastically down to 100 tonnes a year. The population dwindled along with the lead, but it wasn't until just before the First World War that the smelting plant was demolished. The very last people to live in the village left in 1925.
So we passed the aforementioned small gate. I did mean to mention when that gate for Carnaval, and when you're out walking in the countryside, always try and be respectful and make sure you leave gates as you find them. And this gate does actually have please shut the gate behind it, which is I find amusing since there's no fencing around it. But you know, the please shut the gate sign is still there. So yeah, make sure you shut the gate behind you. At the top of the hill, the whole range of the Rins of Kells comes into view. So we go through the deer fence, and then we basically follow this path that runs between the new plantation on the right and the fencing on the left.
Now we're following the old pack road that ran not just between the villages of the Glenkens, but also connected them to the coast and on up to Glasgow and what was Strathclyde. Both pilgrims and smugglers used these roads for centuries. Pilgrims used it to get to Whiphorn, of course, and St Ninian's Cave. And along the road here you will find carvings made by those pilgrims while they were travelling. Among the pilgrims were King James IV, who was Mary Queen of Scots' grandfather, and St Margaret, Queen of Scotland, and as well as that, Robert the Bruce in his last sickness. Smugglers used the road to transport smuggled goods to Edinburgh and Glasgow from the Solway coast where it was landed.
So the hill we've just walked up was Bardenoch Hill. We didn't go straight to the top, but through the fence. As we walk along the path, we're now going along another hill, confusingly called Bradenoch Hill. On the side of this hill, there is some early medieval cross slabs. Tried to find them. Last time I tried, I couldn't find them because it was covered in snow. So, and then a little bit further on, we come to a gate in the deer fence. This is the hardest gate we've had to deal with. Sometimes it's taken two of us just to get it open because the hinges have dropped. Through that gate, we're then taking out, actually using some forestry track. The pack road is just down to the left of us by the dike, as you can just see it down along there. And then we walk along that for a little bit, and then the road curves round to the left, but we're going to go straight on through yet another deer fence, and this bit's 15 odd minutes till we then come back to another track, as you can see ahead of us here. Now, this track itself, the path ahead, does get very overgrown in the summer, and lots of bracken. So if you fancy sticking to the harder road at this point for more firmer ground, there is a path that goes off down there, and you can follow that track round. Or you can cut through these sections here. The last of these sections is the worst, it's the most recently fouled. Once once we get to the end of that, we carry on a little bit down to the left until we come to this path. And when we're walking in the countryside, you do need to think on your feet. For example, with this particular track, during Storm Éowyn, there was a lot of trees came down, and really helpful by the Forestry Commission, put up signs rather than doing anything. But we managed to make it through with some cuts and grazes, but you know. If you're feeling adventurous, you can climb up through the cut on the left and you can get a great view of Dundrew Hill and the surrounding areas. And then, just keeping on the path as we go, we end up with a bit of forestry on the left and right, there's some old dykes in here, some old buildings, and then it opens up and we come out into the Polmaddy Glen.
So now we've arrived at Polmaddy, there's plenty to talk about. The village itself once had a mill, an inn and a reasonable grouping of houses. Up around the village, where the forests are now, people were buried for a time until the parish of Carsphairn was instigated. The village is located on the pack road, so the inn existed to serve those weary travellers, mostly pedlars, on foot, but there must have been pilgrims too, some of whom would have needed stabling for their horses. The story that makes Polmaddy a part of wider Scottish history is the story of the Carlin of Polmaddy, who built the Carlin's cairn on the Rins of Kells.
After escaping the English once again, the Bruce found himself close to the village of Polmaddy, which sits at the feet of the Rins of Kells. Afraid of discovery still, the fugitive king hid in the local miller's barn in the village. When the English soldiers came to the miller's house looking for him, it was the miller's wife who spoke to him. Now, this is the house right here. Now, unlike her husband, who was a supporter of the Balliols, who owned Kenmure Castle to the south of here, the miller's wife was a firm supporter of the Bruce's claim to the throne. After fobbing the soldiers off, she went to inspect the barn, where she found the Bruce hiding. Realising the soldiers were likely to return, and concerned that her husband could not find out who was hiding in their barn, the woman helped the Bruce hide underneath sacks of flour. The soldiers did indeed return, and they searched the barn, even going as far as stabbing the sacks of flour under which Robert was hiding. But Robert kept quiet, and the soldiers were convinced that he was not there. Now, after the Wars of Independence were over, Robert awarded the woman and her husband the land on which they lived in return for her aid. In honour of the king and his generosity, the woman gathered together a number of locals to build a memorial cairn to the king on top of the hill that now belonged to her. Carlin is Old Norse for woman, and the Carlin's cairn still stands today, visible for miles around.
So the pack road would have carried on through crossing the ford over the burn and then up the hill on the other side. However, a lot of that's been lost to forestry and people are trying to find the old route, but they've been struggling. We're going to go slightly to the left, over a narrow bridge and then up to the car park. You can walk down to Dundrew, or you can just get picked up from there and make your way back up to Carsphairn, or take a right and carry on down the road till you come to Dalry, where our next walk will start. So this one is not a core path, this is just a very popular walk with locals. We're basically going to go from Dalry, over Waterside, round to Glenlee and then look back to Dalry.
Dalry has so much history to talk about, but we'll start at the beginning with St John's Seat. Purported to be the seat on which John the Baptist rested after his very long walk from Galloway to Galloway, by tradition giving Dalry the name St John's Town of Dalry in the process. Now, of course, the more modernly accepted reason that Dalry is St John's Town is because of the Knights of St John and the moat down by the river that they built. But the story has long persisted that St John himself stayed here. That story led to an attempted theft of the seat when Joseph Train, exciseman and antiquary, who obtained many of the items that became part of Sir Walter Scott's extensive collection, including this here, the Tor's pony cap, and documentation about the capture of the Rosamond that Robert Burns had taken part in. Joseph Joseph was staying at the inn at the top of the town and heard the story of the seat there. Determined to procure it for Sir Walter, he tried to load the seat onto the back of his pony trap, but was spotted in the act and chased out of the village. Now, I believe that the inn Joseph was staying at was the same inn that the Pentland uprising began at. After an incident in the village at Midtown where an elderly man was tortured in public for adhering to the covenant, local Covenanters decided to march on Edinburgh in protest. As they marched, they picked up other Covenanters along the way, but it all came to a very sorry end at the Battle of Rillian Green, where they were defeated by government troops. Just a little down the hill at Midtown is Lucky Hare's Inn. On the night of Adam Forrester's infamous encounter with the witches, Adam had been drinking here. We'll keep coming back to Adam's tale as we go, as our paths will cross again.
So the first half or so of the walk follows the Southern Upland Way, which comes out just here through from the present and then down through the village. We're following the main street down through the village, which is a rather glorious view if you're seeing it from above. And then near the bottom of the village, there's the old fountain and the junction, and across the road is the Clachan Inn. Clachan Inn taking its name from one of the original names for the village, the Clachan of Dalry. The name next door to that, with the wee red door, is the town hall, and where outside of that there's some signs, basically with information on the front. We're going to go down the wee lane beside the town hall, past the wee viewpoint on the left with a great view across the home of Dalry and the Glenlee hills, and then down the lane, down the wee track, down past Dalry Mott.
The flatness here isn't an accident of nature, but actually the remains of the Bailey of the Motte. The castle that once stood on the Motte was built and maintained by the Knights of St John, who were invited by King David I to guard the pilgrim route to Whithorn. It also overlooks the kirkyard, which contains both a Covenanter's gravesite and a memorial to Alexander Gordon of Earlston, who was also a very staunch adherent to the Covenant, for which he suffered a great deal. That stone is situated very close to the Kenmure Isle, where the crypt of the Gordons of Kenmure is, and it is all that remains of the original church. Now, if you look at the few gravestones that are to be found on the small patch of ground between the Kenmure Isle and the new kirk, you will find the name of Adam Forrester, or on at least one of them. The old kirk was demolished to make room for a new one, and at the spot where you will find Adam's name, there would have been an old window through which he is said to have stopped and looked in to see the lights and revelling of the witches and the deal. From this window, he's said to have spied Lucky Hare and shouted out, "You'll no deny this the morn," to her. After this, he is going to cross the old ford a bit further upriver while the witches attempt to chase him.
So at the bottom of the hill we come to the boat wheel suspension bridge. There was some work done on this a few months ago, so now it's a lot less bouncy, much to the relief of some in the area. Kids not so much, they love bouncing people on there. If you're looking a bit further down, the ford that Adam Forrester would across would have just been a little bit further down. At the end of the bridge you can turn left, which will basically take you along the Water of Ken, round to the Coomburn and then up to Glenlee. We'll actually be coming back this way. And then if you turn right, we go across Great Double Home. Now, I call it Great Double Home, I've only recently found that because when I was doing some research into Adam Forrester last year, I found that name in some of the writings. It's not actually on any maps, whereas all the other homes do have a name. But yeah, we cross Great Double Home until we come to the Millennium Bench, just underneath the oak tree. Now, there is an alternative option if you turn to the left, go across to some double gates. There is a rather heavy deer fence there, but it's an easier route up around the side of Waterside, and it avoids this really steep bits up near the summit. It also goes past the store, so we'll be coming back to that later. And yeah, that's just a beautiful shot Andrew managed to take a couple of years ago in the frost of that oak tree on the bench. So carrying on following the river, we basically go through yet another gate, through a wee bit of woodland, and during the summer there's some great flowers in there. out onto the road, and then back right by Elson Power Station. We're going to take the path to the left following up there. But first, a bit about the Galloway Hydro Scheme.
The Galloway Hydro Scheme began life as an Act of Parliament passed in 1929, just months before the disastrous Wall Street crash of that same year. That it went ahead during the height of the Great Depression that followed seems like a bit of a miracle in these modern times of austerity. But ahead it went, and it created thousands of jobs at a time when they were desperately needed. There was some controversy at the time though, because those jobs were supposed to go to people in the local area first and foremost. But with the employment agencies in Glasgow sending men desperate for work down on foot from the city, it was obvious that a lot of the work wasn't going to locals. Anyway, work began in 1931, and it comprised of 7 full-scale dams, the sluice gates at Glenlee and the tunnel to Glenlee, bringing water through the hills from Clattering Shaws. 5.7 kilometres of the most dangerous work on the whole scheme. 2 of the 5 men who died during the construction died in that tunnel, and another died working on the Clattering Shaws Dam. The scheme wasn't officially opened until 1939, when a ceremony was held at Tunlin Power Station, but it was already generating power by 1935.
Amazing shots that they've got there. So we carry on up through the gate. Just the other side of the gate is a new notice board for anybody that's not been up there recently, just basically giving information about water side and the score. And then just past that, we'll pass another path. There's a path that runs perpendicular to the one we're taking up. It's believed this is actually part of the old pack road, which we just walked just before. Then, as we get near to the top of the hill, we're still on the southern Upland Way, and just at the top, the southern end of the Inns of Kells come into view, and I love this view. Every time I come back, it's one of the first places I go to, walk up here and just take in this view. You may have noticed a small bench as we get near the top, and there's now a new picnic bench just off to the right. And if you need to take a rest, or more likely just sit there and enjoy the views while you're having a bite to eat or having a drink. So the next section is going to be the steepest, but before that we carry on round to the right and we get to the top of the hill. This is obviously not part of the southern way, just a slight detour. Again, the views up here, just stunning. You can just sit there all day. So we carry on following the path down this really steep section. We then come to another road path, across some wee burns, and then we come to another path that runs perpendicular. To the right, it leads up to a gate with a deer fence and onto some moorland that has been rather heavily planted, but it's still not grown that much, so you can still get through there quite comfortably. And if you go to the left, it takes us back round to that aforementioned path, which went through the double gates and up past the score.
We've caught back up with Adam Forrester again, and here we are at the climax of his story. Having been heard and pursued across the countryside by Lucky Hare and the witches, Adam's poor, nameless horse couldn't run anymore. Adam is said to have pulled out his sword and, swearing by God Almighty, carved the score with the tip of his sword in the ground to keep the witches out. Lucky Hare tried to put her hand across the circle onto the horse's rear and left a burned handprint on the poor creature. Unable to cross, the witches waited outside the score until the cock crowed. Then they had to leave Adam and his horse alone because they were powerless in daylight. A wee point of interest, Waterside Hill is not the hill's original name. It was previously known as Knockenjig, which in Gaelic means Hill of the Score. It is also known to some locals as the Witches' Hill.
Then back to the southern Upland Way, we carry on down the hill a little bit, and just on our right we start seeing some woodland appearing. This is Haniston Woods, which is a triple SI, and
these woods were home to one of the most dreadful, legendary witches of the Glenkens, the Witch of Haniston. The stories tell us that she could change shape and would appear in these woods either in the shape of a black cat walking on its hind legs or a naked boy. People would pursue the boy thinking he needed their help, and in that form she would lead them to their doom. They also say she could sink ships in the rivers and lochs as well as at sea by casting a spell in her quaich or drinking cup. Lord Kenmure's cousin narrowly escaped being eaten by the witch after succumbing to her magic, so Lord Kenmure had to deal with her. Interestingly, Lord Kenmure had a run-in with another Dalry witch, the Witch of Druth out by Lochinvar, but it wasn't quite so shocking as his encounter with the Witch of Haniston.
So we get to the bottom of the hill, and the path goes through another deer fence, along some boardwalks through a field at the bottom, which can have livestock in, so obviously your eyes open. Through, over the bridge over the Carsphairn and some woodland, and then back up to the road that runs through the Glen. The southern upland way at this point turns off to the right, deeper into the Glen, but we're going to go left, walking through the back towards Glenlee. There are turn-offs to the right, the first one being to Gareth Mossdale, where there are some nice walks that go through the Gareth estate. They all link up. Sticking with the road, we pass through a couple more entrances into the Gareth estate until we reach the Glenlee power station, the control hub for the Galloway hydroelectric scheme. A little bit further along, we come to Glenlee House.
So we've had 3 witches so far on this walk, but to cap it off, now we have a ghost. The Grey Lady of Glenlee was an apparition seen around the house of a woman who allegedly murdered her husband with poisoned wine. The most famous sighting of the Grey Lady happened during a dinner party at Glenlee House, where she frightened many of the guests by appearing in an upstairs room. Now, there's a belief that the Grey Lady is the ghost of Lady Ashburton, whose husband had a long illness before his death. But Lady Ashburton seems to be a fairly free-spirited philanthropist of art, so I'm not entirely convinced that she was a murderer.
So at the end of the Glenlee Road, we basically come to a junction. If you go right, you come through to New Galloway. If you go left, which is the way we're going to go, start heading back towards our eye. We cross a couple of bridges and then take a right through the gate, just the other side of the second bridge. It takes us back down to the Water of Ken, which we follow around, past the site of the old stepping stones, which sadly got washed away a few years ago. Through one more gate, assuming the fences haven't been fixed before that, following the Water of Ken, all the way back to the suspension bridge near to where we started. So, next slide, please, there. And that brings us to the end of the second walk, and now we're going to go on to the third walk, which is going from New Galloway to Mossdale. This is Core Path 177, and we're starting at the current location, the Carsphairn.
The Carsphairn was built first as a primary school, and it was where Alexander Murray first learned Latin. Alexander Murray, whose memorial is overlooking Tulmottry and the Greymare's Tail on the Queen's Way, was a self-taught polyglot. His father was a shepherd that farmed the land around Murray's birthplace, also on the Queen's Way. Alexander went on to become the foremost professor in foreign languages in the UK in his lifetime. New Galloway itself was founded by the Gordon family in the 1600s and then modelled as a new town along the lines of Castle Douglas and Newton Stewart later. It was originally called New Town of Galloway, but that's been shortened since.
So we're going to come out of here, turn right, and head south through the village. All the way down, past the golf course. There is a cut through just past the car park for the golf course where you can walk in if the road's really busy on the other side of the day. Or if you carry on along the road, there is a hole in the wall that you can get through there and onto the path. Following this path through, we do pass a lay-by on the way through, and this is where we get a choice. We can go straight away from the view here and carry on, which is a shallower, easier walk, slightly less steep, it's still climbing it. Or you can go straight up the steps, which is a steeper climb but more direct to the viewpoint. Now, the viewpoint up here is just stunning. The views down the glen on a clear day, now see taking all of Loch Ken. It's just, yeah, I love going up there, taking the dog up there, and just sitting up there for 5-10 minutes and enjoying it. There is a small path just behind that, which takes you through to the golf course and another viewpoint up there. That one, you can just make it at the top of Kenmure Castle, but it's a bit of a stretch. So leaving the viewpoint, we carry on down the path, down some steps, and then we take a right. If we take a left, that joins up with the Galloway Woodland Circuit. Taking a right brings us deeper into the woods, all the way down to this gate with this magnificent beech tree. At this point, we're going to there's a forest circuit that goes off to the right, which we'll connect up with later on. But we're going to go left, following the signs, keeping us on the right track here. Now, do keep an eye out for these signs, because there is some fire breaks that look like they're the right track and can lead you off in the wrong direction. There is also some other paths that go off. For example, like you see here, like the sign that's pointing us off to the right. This path that goes off to the left actually takes us down a really steep path that comes out just across the road from Kenmure Castle.
And now it's time for another wee video, which is a brief history of Kenmure Castle.
Kenmure Castle originally was a stronghold of the Lords of Galloway, the semi-independent masters of early medieval wild Galloway. For a time it was owned by the Balliols through Lady Divergilla, who inherited it from her father Alan, Lord of Galloway. After the Wars of Independence, Robert the Bruce granted it to the Douglases. From there, the castle went through a succession of owners until it finally came into the possession of the Gordons of Lochinvar. The castle is sat on a rocky promontory overseeing Loch Ken and its wetlands, and it has seen a great deal of history from this vantage point. The Gordons were certainly no shy and retiring part of that history. Under their stewardship, it was once burned down by the regent of King James VI, then again by Oliver Cromwell's troops. One Lord Kenmure was captured in battle, taken to London and beheaded for his support of the Jacobite cause, but the family had been Covenanters. It's also seen a number of famous visitors over the years, from James IV, who stayed on his pilgrimage to Whithorn, Queen Mary on her flight from Scotland, Robert Burns on a Galloway tour, and more recently, Outlander star Sam Hewkin, who used to play in these ruins as a child. Even when the Gordons were eventually forced to sell it, the castle still prospered. Alexander Trotter, in his book East Galloway Sketches, described it like this. The castle dominates the Kells district, but in its imposing appearance, together with its history and associations, dwarfs into comparative insignificance all other Glenkens attractions. The castle has been a place of importance for some hundreds of years, and even at the present day is more a centre of attraction to strangers than any other Galloway residents. East Galloway Sketches was published in 1901. Unfortunately, the years following that publication were not so kind to the castle, as we can see. The roof was removed sometime before 1960, when the building was gutted by a demolition company after it had been closed as a hotel.
So going straight on from the path, instead of going to the left, and then there's another sign, we want to go right. That takes us down the hill. There's a split in the path here. The right-hand path is really steep, but it does meet up at the bottom pretty quick. At the bottom of the hill, we come to another path that goes across. Taking the right basically brings us back to that forest circuit that I mentioned, that beech tree. Taking a left just takes us off to the gate. We're going to carry on straight over, curving around to the left. The path now starts following the Knocknarling Burn. We then cross the burn with the wee wooden bridge through a field, keeping an eye out for signs here because the gate is hidden under the bridge, and then it takes us up past the pond that I've been informed used to be the water supply for Kenmure Castle. From here we carry on up past the fresh cut. At the top of this hill is ground's rough. It's better than it was last year, but it's still really rough and boggy, and yeah, so you just be careful around there. We go through another piece of woodland out onto the track that, if you go right, takes you up to Knocknarling. We're going to take a left, heading back towards the road until we see a track going off to the right that takes us off into thicker forestry.
Scotland was traditionally a country with vast forests, but the modernising that began as far back as the 1600s led to a steady decrease until the 1800s. By then, people actually complained about how bare and unforested Scotland was, if you can imagine such a thing. At the end of the First World War, just 2% of Scotland had forest. The Forestry Commission was created in 1919 to replant the forest that had been felled to support the First World War. The Galloway Forest Park was established later in 1947. It employed large numbers of local people in the first instance to plant the trees, and there was long time work to be had in thinning them, a task often done until as late as William Patterson's lifetime in like the 80s and 90s by men or lads with teams of Clydesdale horses.
So we're going to stick to this road for quite a while. There's a few roads going off to the right that basically lead off around the back of or up Cairn Edward Hill, including one that goes along the Polmaddy, starting off at the lay-by just down by the road. And then we also go pass along beside the Lowrun or Larun Burn. I've heard both is dead. And basically, when you're driving back or going to the other end, if you start from there, make sure to stop and check out the Larun Falls, because, yeah, they're lovely. And then we carry on. There's a bridge over the Larun Burn just a wee bit further up. If you go over that bridge, just along a wee track, it's a dead-end track. At track level, there's a lot of wind-blown trees, so it's difficult to see, but if you're willing to scramble up the hills just beside it, you've got to get a great view down the glen, or if you have a drone.
It's a beautiful view, actually. Yeah, you're right. It's a lovely view, but and it's almost a shame to spoil it with this particularly gruesome bit of Galloway history. But the course of British history could have gone very differently if events on one of those bonny islands right there in the loch had panned out a little bit differently. The story goes that Fergus, Lord of Galloway, had pretensions to making a kingdom of Galloway for himself. When he died, his two sons, Galloway and Uchtred, inherited the lordship between them. Now, they were half-brothers, these two. Galloway in the west of Galloway and Uchtred in the east. When William I of Scotland made an ill-fated attempt to take back Northumbria from England, the brothers had accompanied him on the campaign. When William was captured, they returned to Galloway. Galloway seems to have decided to use the opportunity of William's capture to attempt to realise his father's dream of making a kingdom of Galloway. He expelled the king's bailiffs and then went on a killing and burning spree that might have actually put the Black Douglas to shame, slaughtering the English and French stationed in Galloway and all of the king's people too. Uchtred was furious and demanded a meeting on what he may be considered fairly neutral ground, right there on one of those wee islands. The meeting ended brutally for Uchtred. He was supposedly castrated, blinded and had his tongue cut out before being dismembered. After that brutal act, Galloway appealed to Henry II of England to recognise Galloway as his kingdom, but when the king's ambassadors heard what had happened to Uchtred, who may have been Henry's cousin, Henry refused to back Galloway.
Got to be careful who you double cross. So the next track on the left goes up the side of Bennon Hill, which can have some great views at the recent cuts. But last time I was up there's a number of trees across the path. That track does go round and actually link up with the path up to the Bennon viewpoint. The less said about the state of the Bennon viewpoint at the moment, the better. A little bit further round, there's also the path off to the secret cages and the path that goes back down to the road. And with a bit of a scramble, you can get up to the Bennon viewpoint car park. Then basically carrying on through along the path, through some forestry, and then there's been another bit that has been replanted in the last couple of years, but the views there on a clear day, just lovely. This wasn't the best of days that I got this picture, but I was still kind of breathtaking when it was up there. So there's also carrying on through there, and we come then down to other tracks that go down, and then eventually we come to the Raiders Road. At the Raiders Road, if we took a right, we basically can go to the Otter Pools and up to Clattering Shaw's Loch and Dam. We're going to go left, which takes us down to Lochshorn Viaduct and on to Mossdale.
The Raiders Road, pardon me, the Raiders Road, I've gone that way, we'll go back that way, sorry. That's better. The Raiders Road gets its name from the novel The Raiders by S.R. Crockett. Although he's a bit obscure now, over 100 years after his death, he was considered a celebrity author of his time, and I think a member of the Kailyard School as well. He was born not very far from here at Little Duchay by Polmaddy and raised by his grandparents. He published 66 works throughout his life, and they are largely adventure stories featuring Galloway. You can delve into them through your local library.
I'm actually reading The Raiders at the moment, so so there is a couple of places that you can get down to the loch along here, but if you can get down there, the views of the viaduct are, again, beautiful. Not much you can say other than show off pictures. So that viaduct actually used to be part of the old Port Patrick railway line.
The old railway line to Portpatrick ran over the Lochstone Viaduct, and you can follow the old railway line to Loch Skerrill Halt, where the trains used to stop to take on water after the huge climb up from Loch Ken and then on towards Gatehouse. The other way the line goes back to the old train station at Mossdale, which was called New Galloway Station. People who stayed at Kenmure Castle during its time as a hotel would have gotten off there and taken a car up to the castle. It would also have been the only real way for locals to travel as far away as Dumfries and Portpatrick and further, if they had a need to. The line goes over the railway bridge at Parton, where James Clerk Maxwell would have returned to stay at Glenlee during the summer months when he was not in London. He is of course buried in the kirkyard there. There was also a derailment on this side of Parton Bridge too, when a train carrying mail for Ireland went off the rails. Many of the carriages were destroyed, but nobody was hurt. The Portpatrick line was closed as a consequence of the Beeching report. Hello, Mr. Beeching. Lord Beeching. Which is how I end all of my videos about the old railway stations.
No swearing here, otherwise some comments might have been made there. So once we actually get to the viaduct, there's some couple of paths that could run underneath the bridge that go through the woods and join up with the old railway line further along. There's also a path at the back of the picnic ground that you can get on, a gate at the back of the picnic ground that you can get onto the old railway line and walk all the way down to Mossdale, or as Andrew just said, all the way from to Loch Skerrill and onwards. We're going to carry on with the Raiders Road where the cool path takes us until we get to this sign, basically a book trail sign, and we're going to cut through here and through towards the moss. This bit can be a bit boggy, and we're cutting through fire breaks and can get a little overgrown at times. And then get through onto Mossdale Flow. From here, you might bump into the occasional local walking their dogs or just sitting taking their ease after a hard day's work. Basically, we cross through a couple of fences there, following the path. There is a path that goes down to Mossdale at this point, but we're going to carry on so we actually meet up with the old railway line again. And from there, we're going to take a left and start just heading down towards Mossdale itself. There is a couple of other little tracks going off of there as well, but we can carry on, and then you can just see nice straight line, straight shot down there. And cross under this bridge into the old railway station, where a lot of some of the buildings are gone. The area just the other side is overgrown. That you can find your way through, and there is you can see the old sidings and the old railway lines and things. But we're not going to go through there. You can also carry on round and all the way down to the Boat Road Bridge, just go around the corner a wee bit. But we're going to actually stop here, we're going to take a left, walk into the village, past the car park, and then back to where we've come from. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions? Anyone would like to ask about? Yeah?
So, you asked the Carver tale about Uchtred and the various bodily. I always wondered, I've never seen old photos of the Ken Valley before.
Yeah.
So were they islands? Or was there a loch there, or what was?
Well,
what was the
at
last
that
valley?
point, I mean, there are old maps, and I meant to get some of them out, but in the end, I ran out of time, I'm afraid. Where you can see that the loch goes down basically just past Parton is where it went to, and then it's basically it's the River Dee at that point, and that's how it used to be. So at that point where those islands are, those would have been there at the time. Obviously the water level was about, I think it was about 6 feet less at that time, so they would have been, you know, but they're still quite a bit out into the water, so they would have still been islands. Yeah. Anybody else?
Alright, well, that makes it easy. So basically, we wanted to try and tell as much of the area, stories about as much of the area as we could, but it's so many that we had, and so much that we actually had to cut out of this. There's so many walks that we wanted to mention, there's so many stories on even the ones we did that we wanted to mention. But essentially we were limited with the time, so we basically had to cut a lot of it out. So as such, we've had an idea.
We're going to have a monthly podcast, which some people in this audience may be invited to take part in, as a matter of fact. Where basically it's going to be called Talking Galloway. It'll be starting hopefully in January, all things sort of like, and that'll be once a month, and it'll be a rambling conversation about whatever aspect of Galloway with our guests as well. So hopefully that should be quite interesting to you all. And Joe.
Thank you so much. It was just, I just love it, and it feels like we could have breathed all that lovely air with you. And I'm so excited about the podcast. Cultural Glenkens are going to be helping Angela and Andy launch that and be involved with that journey. So please do watch out for any news on that and jump on board and listen to us. Yeah. We're also in the process of planning summer events where we would do guided walks with Andy and Angela actually going out to these places. So again, please watch out for that. It'd be great if we could take all of you with us. We could be a right cruise scrabbling over those trees and listening to your super stories, because there is such a wealth, and you've given us such a lovely flavour tonight, and I've just enjoyed every moment. So we'd like to thank you again. Many hours, and it just has entertained us and made us feel wonderful this evening. I'd like to thank you as well for coming along to Galloway Conversations. Do look out, we're doing a monthly talk. I'm just going to do a quick plug for my next two conversations. The next one in January the 25th. Actually, we're mentioning Bailey and Bruce. We've got Stuart Culloch from D&G Heritage and Archaeological Society, who's going to be talking about the Southwest Wars of Independence. And asking the question, was it a war, or was it just a war of independence, or was it a civil war? So that's on Sunday the 25th at 2:30 here at the Catstrand. And our Galloway conversation in February is about Margaret Morris celebrating a life in creativity. So if you're interested in dance and want to know more about Margaret, Sarah Shackleton will be here talking about her enlightenment and practices of the pioneer dancer Margaret Morris. So please do watch out for those. I think they will be monthly, and we'll try. And if you want a topic, or if you know anyone who you think actually could deliver a talk, or perhaps you yourself might have a gem that you'd like to come and be brave like these wonderful people have been, do get in touch with me. Joe Jackson at catstrand.com is my email. And thank you again all for